The gut microbiome is simply all of the microbes that call you home. And we focus on bacteria the most often because that is the lion's share of that community. But we're also talking yeasts, we're talking viruses. There are the presence of so many viruses and also potentially harmful bacteria living in a normal, healthy human gut. Like we have what we call opportunistic pathogens. C. diff, many of us, particularly in the medical, we know C. diff because it's causing these antibiotic, potentially deadly infections. But many healthy people walk around with C. diff in their gut with no whiff of symptoms or any sort of presentation, because when the gut microbiome, when that community of microbes is strong, and when you have the right ones, they help to keep those opportunistic pathogens at bay.
This is the Visible Voices podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Resa Lewis. In today's conversation, I'm delighted to bring you my chat with registered dietitian, mostly plant-based recipe developer nutritionist, Desiree Nielsen. She's the host of the All Sorts podcast, and she has an amazing website. Check it out in the show notes. You can find more about her recipes, her podcast, her articles, her newsletter, and her cookbooks. Desiree came on my radar as I was searching to speak with guests related to Gut Health Awareness Month. And those of you who know me know that I really like to say, trust your gut. So when we get to the conversation, we're talking about gut health, bowels, bowel movement, constipation, and that's a bit of a trigger warning. This is the content. We're here for our health. Let's get to it. Desiree, thank you so much for joining the Visible Voices podcast.
Thank you. I'm so happy to have this conversation with you.
I've heard you mention a retail dietitian. Qu'est-ce que c'est? What is this?
Yeah, this was something that when I was in school was very new. The idea of putting a dietitian in a grocery store where you make your food decision. I mean, it's genius. Like, why had we not thought of this before? And when we have all of this nutrition information swimming around our heads, like, I hear you need to eat more fiber, or I'm trying to avoid sodium because my physician said so. And then you get to the grocery store and you're like, what do I do? And to have dietitians there to say, well, let me take you on a little tour of the grocery store and show you everything that's gluten-free, or how to read a nutrition label to avoid sodium.
Is this common? I mean, have all of us been walking around grocery stores and retail outlets unaware that there are dietitians available to us?
They're not everywhere, but there are a lot of incredible retail, particularly in the US, like Wegmans, for example. Here in Canada, we have our Loblaws superstores that have a team of retail dietitians. So it's worth asking and being curious, because it's not everywhere, but your store might actually have support.
I had no idea. Love this knowledge nugget.
Yes.
So let's continue with gut health and gut health origins and nerdiness. You recently had a podcast episode on constipation, and I shared with you that one of the first lessons, or I'll say pattern, that I appreciated when I started doing shifts in the emergency department as a resident doctor or doctor in training is so many people came in complaints related to bowel movements. Now that we know what we know, it's actually really important to be focused on bowel movements. So constipation, evolution, go.
I'm not surprised, because 95% of Americans don't consume enough dietary fiber, which is a whole other thing. But constipation makes you feel terrible. If you are not moving your bowels on the regular, you are literally full of stool.
Right.
Like, that doesn't feel good. It makes you feel tired. It makes you feel full. It makes you feel bloated and uncomfortable. And it's so common. But actually, there was this really great study that I saw, because, the estimates are like, between 10 and 20% of Americans have constipation. But there was this great survey, and I think they surveyed like 5,000 people who said that they had had constipation before. And only like 38% of them had ever told their doctor. I'm all about destigmatizing this thing that everyone does, but no one wants to talk about.
Yeah. I love that you brought this up about stigma, about shame, about not talking about it. And in the lifestyle medicine and gut health world, thankfully, people are speaking about it. I was out to dinner with one of my other emergency medicine friends, and she had a young daughter. And she was just really surprised and couldn't figure out why her daughter would not sit still, didn't want to sit down, was really irritable, kept walking and pacing back and forth in the restaurant. Dinner ended, and about an hour, 2 hours later, I got a text. And she said, I realized why she couldn't sit still, why she was so irritable. She had to have a bowel movement, and her daughter had been having some challenges with moving her bowels. And I've noticed with friends with children, young children, the concept of bowel movements and constipation is much more, I'll say, epidemic than it used to be, say, maybe when I was a child. And I think it has to do with things that aren't going to be surprising: sugar, hyper-processed foods, and going back to that lack of fiber.
Yeah. Constipation is so much more convoluted and complex than I think a lot of us give it credit for. But like at its basics, we're talking about hydration. We're talking about movement, which I think is also overlooked when it comes to constipation. Like you need to move it to move it. So when we're super sedentary, our gut is getting fewer signals to actually move things along. But the fiber is such a big piece of it. We're very, very preoccupied with protein these days. And yet very few of us, if we have enough to eat, very few of us are deficient in protein. Whereas overwhelmingly, we're not getting enough fiber. And I think because we sort of dismiss it as like, oh, it's just for poops, but it's not. Like the research on fiber, it touches every part of us. We're looking at like inflammatory status. We're looking at our heart health. We're looking at even just for people who say, well, I'm always hungry. I can't seem to fill myself up. Well, fiber fills you up. It helps you to feel full and satisfied. Like it's just this thing that we really need to take more seriously than we do.
You and your guest, when you had your episode on constipation, spoke about yoga. But there is this element of you literally feel your organs twisting and things moving and things being helped along for regular daily rituals and regimens.
Yeah. And, yoga is incredible, both for the sort of physicality of it, but also for the stress relief part of it. But there is a very deep nervous system connection with your digestive function. And when we are stressed, when we're constantly in this fight or flight mode, and, our body is like, well, it's not a safe time to go poop.
What do doctors miss when they don't have a conversation with dietitians, when they don't engage dietitians in their conversation regarding patient care?
I've been a dietitian for over 15 years, and I remember having a lot of hard conversations because physicians did not necessarily believe that nutrition would make an impact, and a classic, because I've been doing digestive health, Crohn's disease, ulcerative colitis, celiac disease. Celiac disease is different because we know that it's unique as a chronic disease, that nutrition is the therapy. But for something like Crohn's disease, I heard constantly, well, diet has nothing to do with inflammatory bowel disease. When it couldn't be further from the truth. You have people who are malnourished, who have, multiple bowel movements a day. They're in pain. There's so much that we can do with nutrition. So I think being curious at the outset, that when someone is receiving a diagnosis, saying, okay, so what's your nutrition like? And what's the research say on how nutrition can potentially support not just symptom management, but like improved quality of life and reduced risk of further complications or, other diagnoses going forward. So it is our job to take nutrition literature and transfer it into actionable, practical advice. And busy people have to figure out how to translate nutrition advice into what we actually feed ourselves and our families on a daily basis. And so dietitians are really uniquely positioned as evidence-based experts, but also in translating that evidence into very usable advice so that we can have people actually follow our advice.
I love that concept of like translational medicine, translational science. And you do that in many ways, but one is that you create recipes, and many of those recipes can be found on your website, but also they're found in some of the books that you have published. And this strikes me as the time to ask you about your voice. When did you realize that you had a voice in this space, and when did you start using that voice?
Gosh, I feel like it was thrust upon me because, both you and I as introverts, I was so terrified of public speaking that in my lectures in university, if I had the idea for a question, just the thought of raising my hand and asking a question in my lectures gave me heart palpitations. Like I could not do it. And then when I got into my first job, part of what we did in the grocery stores was host wellness talks.
You mean as a retail dietitian?
As a retail dietitian, yeah. So one of the things I did was, give grocery store tours, but also wellness talks. And they're like, we want you to give these talks. And I was terrified. I was like, I cannot. But luckily, because no one knew who I was, it started very small, talking to 6, 7 people. And then those grew to 50 people. And now I can stand on a stage with 1,000 people and give a talk. And it was really, people say, oh, you're such a natural. I was like, I am not natural at this. I had to, full body sweats, like anxiety. And it was just sort of in the practice. And so I think where I found my voice after having those opportunities thrust upon me was when I started getting the feedback. I heard something you said 3 months ago, and now my blood sugars are totally within normal range. Like, realizing that I had the opportunity, but also for some reason, the gift that I could say things in a way that resonated with people and they actually made change. And that's one of the most incredible pieces of this career that I actually wasn't really expecting. It's like, if I help one person, I've done a good thing in my life, but the opportunity to help more than one person is just incredible.
One of the things that you've shared is you create recipes, and one of the many impetuses is that you want to help people realize that the food can taste good. And I'm wondering if you can say more about that.
Yeah, that's another thing that I was not expecting when I started out, because I wasn't really much of a cook. Like I did cook, I was just sort of like throwing vegetables on some mac and cheese and calling it a day in my 20s. So the whole recipe development thing really surprised me as well. But one of the reasons why I love it, again, it's that sort of translating nutrition advice into something actionable. Like, well, how do I get more fiber or more legumes on my plate? Well, here's a recipe that's really delicious. And I think it's so important for me anyways, because I love to eat. There's the live to eat people and eat to live. Like I live to eat. I dream of my next meal while I'm eating my current meal. And so I think that there is very much this misconception that healthy eating or even eating for your medical needs is somehow deprivation or restrictive. And I want to show people that you can eat in a way that cares for your body that's actually very fun and exciting and about flavor, because we all should enjoy what we eat. And the more we enjoy what we eat, the more likely we are to continue on our path.
I was really curious about what we know with gut health and prevention, treatment, reversal of long COVID.
Surprisingly, don't see a lot of long COVID in our dietetics practice. When you look at the literature, there's like a couple of things that we know pretty clearly. And the first is that the spike protein on the virus is directly attacking the epithelial cells in the digestive lining. And we know that it also increases zonulin. And zonulin is a classic marker of gut permeability and also inflammation that we learned so much from Dr. Alessio Fasano with all his groundbreaking celiac disease research. And we also see that there's RNA shedding in the stool that also correlates with these gut symptoms. So it's kind of fascinating. Like one of the papers that I've read looked 12 to 18 months past and found that most people who had GI presentations of COVID had at least one of the symptoms still 12 to 18 months later. And so when we are looking at our practice, we sort of look at it like a post-infectious IBS.
In my translation, not knowing all the terms, but having a sense of the science, is that it basically disrupts our absorption of our gut. And also, all of a sudden, I had a flashback when I was treating patients presenting with COVID in the emergency department. The way elder patients were presenting was different than the way middle age, younger age, even children. And that was a lot were presenting with abdominal pain and copious diarrhea. And we thought, oh, it's something intestinal, it's not COVID. And sure enough, this was their presentation of COVID.
And so interesting that you said that. Like, I find that fascinating because immediately I think about the microbiome. And there is a little bit of data behind that, that certain species of bacteria appear to be protective or correlated with less severe disease symptoms. And there's also a little bit of research there for probiotics too. And when I think of our elder population, I immediately think of like lower diversity, far less resilience in the microbiome. So like intuitively that makes sense to me, but I'd never heard that. So I'm fascinated.
We hear this gut microbiome a lot. Is there a simple working definition you can share with me and the audience?
Yeah. So the gut microbiome is simply all of the microbes that call you home. And we focus on bacteria the most often because that is the lion's share of that community. But we're also talking yeasts, we're talking viruses. There are the presence of so many viruses and also potentially harmful bacteria living in a normal, healthy human gut. Like we have what we call opportunistic pathogens. C. diff, many of us, particularly in the medical, we know C. diff because it's causing these antibiotic, potentially deadly infections. But many healthy people walk around with C. diff in their gut with no whiff of symptoms or any sort of presentation, because when the gut microbiome, when that community of microbes is strong, and when you have the right ones, they help to keep those opportunistic pathogens at bay.
And what I'd like is I'm going to talk about some specific foods and or beverages, and no need to go into like a deep dive or all the literature, as we say, but just, sort of a response for the audience, how they should think about these foods and these drinks. So I'm going to start with black coffee.
Tons of antioxidants, doesn't deserve its bad rep.
Ooh, yeah, I actually thought it had a good rep because particularly as long as you don't cloud it, but I'm bummed with milk and with sugar, but like black coffee, fermented, antioxidant, caffeine.
Yeah. A documented physical and mental performance enhancement associated with lower risk of chronic diseases like type 2 diabetes. It gets a bit of a bad rep in like the wellness sphere as being too stimulatory, but as long as it's okay for you, as long as you're not trying to prop yourself up with 17 cups of coffee because you slept 3 hours, enjoy.
Avocado.
Love avocado. One, avocado is not a protein. I just got to put it out there because I see people talking about it as protein. Rich in healthy fats, surprisingly high in fiber. Almost 7 grams of fiber in a half an avocado. So if you need more fiber, it's a great place to get it.
Overblown in terms of all the avocado smash toasts that we see all over the globe.
That's what we do, right? We take everything and we just blow it up to the point where we're all sort of sick of it. But avocado is a wonderful, healthy fat. We do need more of it. It's really rich in a few vitamins. And like I said, the fiber, all about the fiber. So if you love it, go for it. And not just on toast.
Salmon.
Salmon is incredible. So salmon is very rich in omega-3 fatty acids, which is something that we forget we need. It is an essential fat, meaning our body can't make it. We have to consume omega-3s from food and long-chain omega-3s from fish in particular, because supplements, the research is mixed. So if you consume fish, salmon, and then the smaller fish like sardines, herring, and mackerel, really sustainable ways and affordable ways of getting that omega-3.
There's a little bit of concern about what they're able to provide if they're farm raised or the way we're getting our salmon these days.
And that is a concern because we live in a very complex industrialized food system. Wild salmon stocks are not always plentiful, which means it's not always available. I think that salmon farming has come a long way. There are some very innovative on-land salmon farms because here where I live, there's a lot of pushback on open water salmon farming because it can spread disease to local wildlife populations. But there's some very innovative on-land farmed salmon. And so I also think in terms of sustainability as a population that has the means of selecting the foods we want from all over the world, we need to think about the ecological impact.
Plant milks, and I'll just pick 3. Soy, almond, and oat?
Soy is my favorite of the plant milks. The first reason being it is nutritionally the most similar to dairy milk of any of the plant milks out there. It's very creamy. It contains plenty of protein, like 7 to 8 grams of protein per cup, which is exactly like cow's milk. Almond milk is, it's sort of the darlings who went backwards. So it's like almond milk was really popular for a long time. The reason it was so popular, it's low calorie, full stop. We're in a very diet focused society. Almonds are very, very nutritious, but they're very dense, and it's almost impossible to put a meaningful amount of almonds suspended in the solution. So almond milk is essentially like water tinted with almonds. But if you're looking for a low calorie way to add calcium to your life, because we do not give enough focus to calcium, it's great. So you can pop unsweetened almond milk in your smoothie and you're going to get your glass worth of calcium. It's fantastic. Oat milk sort of took over from almond milk because it tastes incredible. Let's be clear. Oat milk is delicious. It's very creamy. It's very rich. It's low in protein, as is almond milk. So typically, both of those have about 1 gram per cup. So you need to get your protein elsewhere. But oat milk sort of fell out of favor because all of a sudden people woke up and said, oh, it's carbs. Not that we should be worried about carbs whatsoever. But in our diet-focused society, we are. And so what makes it so creamy is all those carbs.
And it's ultra-processed.
Yeah, ultra-processing is an interesting one right now. We have a little bit of an evidence base growing, particularly with things like the NOVA classification of like what pertains to an ultra-processed versus not an ultra-processed food. But I'll say this, not all ultra-processed foods are the same thing. Like a protein powder is not the same as a Cheeto. We love to have all or nothing statements about nutrition. There's always so much nuance and context to it. So if you use a protein powder in your smoothie, that is ultra processed and also contributing an incredible amount of nutrition. There are lots of ultra processed, like one of the dietitian's favorite, like all brand buds. We love psyllium. We love an all brand bud. And if you can toss like 10 grams of fiber onto your breakfast and a third of a cup of like psyllium buds, technically that's ultra processed, but incredibly nutrient dense.
Walnuts.
Love walnuts. I think nuts and seeds and legumes, but nuts, seeds, and legumes are 3 sort of areas of food that people forget about. Like we eat peanut butter, but many of us don't consume these like pumpkin seeds and hemp seeds and walnuts. Walnuts have omega-3s, not nearly as high as hemp, chia, or flax, but fantastic. Part of the sort of like Mediterranean style dietary pattern, which there are many healthful ways to eat, but that is one that we have the most research of. So consuming like a 1/4 cup of some nut, which could be walnuts a day, is a fantastic addition to the diet.
In one of your podcast episodes, you specifically spoke with your guest about the Mediterranean diet. And one of the highlights that I like about discussions about the Mediterranean diet is that, sure, there's the food and that it's whole, real foods that one is eating, but it's also the style of eating. It's sitting, taking your time, eating in community, and then often afterwards going for a walk, that whole movement.
Yeah, I do think, again, getting back to this sort of nuance of what is nutrition, it's not only eating salads 3 times a day, it's how do we eat? How do we sit? We know, and we do actually have data on, the importance of family meals for mental health and physical well-being. And so I think when we look to these traditional dietary patterns that often are deeply out of step, even people in Italy don't live in the traditional Mediterranean sense like they used to. So understanding when it comes to these dietary patterns and also ways of approaching food in our lives, one, the more that we can cook from whole foods, the better, whatever that looks like. If it's just twice a week for you, okay, better than nothing, but also sitting down. Not in front of our phones, not in front of a screen, but like actually sitting down together and taking 10, 15, 20 minutes to have a conversation, to signal to your body, again, getting this idea, this is rest time. This is nourishment time. This is not time to be doing 50 million things.
Cinnamon.
Cinnamon. Love cinnamon. I also think spices are highly underrated. Hallmark of my cooking is that I don't just use like a tiny pinch of things. Like I put spices and herbs by the spoonful and handful. They're incredibly nutrient dense. Many spices and herbs are sources of anti-inflammatory and antioxidant phytochemicals. Cinnamon also adds a sweet taste. So it helps our food and drink taste sweeter with less sugar. And there's a little bit of interesting research on cinnamon and blood sugars. I mean, you have to consume a lot. You have to consume like over a teaspoon a day, which there's also issues with. If you have cassia cinnamon, that could be very dangerous. You want to use a Ceylon cinnamon if you're consuming a lot of cinnamon. But yeah, fantastic. Add flavor at every opportunity, and spices like cinnamon are a great way to do that.
Bringing to the close our conversation, audience members may be a little overwhelmed, may not accept this whole food, plant-based, food is going to make a difference in my health. I do think actually people are onto it. You're certainly into it. I'm fully on board. What's just one thing? What is just one thing that you think everybody can start today?
My favorite just one thing is to, whenever possible, try and make half your plate fruits and vegetables. If you simply transferred 50% of your plate and dedicated it to fruits and vegetables, as many meals as possible, it will transform the way you feel. You'll increase the nutrient density, decrease the calorie density. You're going to increase your vitamins, minerals, phytochemicals. Nutrition can be just that simple.
In a mind reframe destigmatization attempt, carbs are not evil.
No.
But societally, nutritionally, commercially, we've been led to believe that carbs are evil.
When we say that carbs are evil, we think of a very specific thing. We're thinking of the like bakery muffin or, a giant plate of pasta. But we have to realize that carbs are our body's preferred source of fuel. And all plant foods have carbs. It's always, as I say, pattern over plate. And the data supports this. So when folks on the internet are saying plant proteins are not absorbable, untrue, unequivocally, dietary patterns that are predominantly plants, you don't have to be vegan or vegetarian, but dietary patterns that are very high in whole plant foods win every single time for risk of almost every single chronic disease, improvement in symptoms in many chronic diseases. So the goal is always, wherever you are, shift at least 10, 15, 20% on the side of plants, and you will be healthier.
Pattern over plate.
Pattern over plate.
The Resa Wrap-Up. Special thanks to Desiree Nielsen for joining me in conversation, and to you, audience, for sticking it out in this episode where we talk about gut health, bowel movements, constipation, all sorts of stuff. This is important for your health. So I want you to trust your gut, and I'd like you to work on your relationship and your communication with your gut. Number one, work towards 50% of your plate being comprised of fruits and vegetables. Number two, fiber. Fiber, fiber, fiber. Fruits and vegetables actually provide that fiber, and this helps with our gut health and with our movements. Number three, movements. Movement helps with your movements. That's right. Get up, walk, run, exercise, stretch, twist, and consider a yoga practice because that helps with movement. That's all I have for you this week, audience. See you next time. The Visible Voices podcast amplifies voices in the healthcare, equity, and current trends spaces. We are a production of the People's Media Network. Our team includes Dr. Giuliano DePortu and me, Dr. Resa E. Lewis. Please find me through my website and on social media, Resa E. Lewis, MD, or through the podcast, thevisiblevoicespodcast.com. Please give us a 5-star rating on Apple or wherever you listen to podcasts. Also, please be sure to share the show with a friend. The views and opinions expressed by the host and guests are their own and do not necessarily reflect the opinion of the institution with which they are affiliated or identified. Information herein should never be used as a substitute for clinical judgment or for medical advice.